One, two, three. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming back from lunch, for joining us, for being here today. How many people were in the first session, which was amazing? I'm so glad everyone could be here because there's so many continuities and carryovers to the conversation that we're going to be having this afternoon. My name is Tracy Matthews. I'm the Executive Director at the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture. And you're welcome for the lunch. Thank you for being here. This panel is entitled Practicing Freedom, Making Just Futures. And similarly to how we started in the morning, we're not going to go through and read all the bios. I hope folks brought their programs with them. But we're going to have people's stories come out as part of the conversation today. And so we're going to try to keep it conversational and get the audience involved. Hi, thank you for my interpreter. So just in case, if people want to, since I wanted to do something because Gina had us read this morning and that was so helpful for me. And I don't know how you all feel, but it's like after lunch and the itis and the dread always. So thinking if we can just take a moment and just stretch a little bit, stretch your arms out. Put your legs around. That might make us more sleepy, right? For this panel, which I hope will be as dynamic. I'm sure it will be as dynamic. I hope y'all know more than people. Dynamic and engaging as our morning panel. And as I said, there's lots of connections between the two. We had two of our speakers this morning, Lisa Biggs and Zelda Rowland, who were talking about their work with folks who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. And this panel is kind of taking us into a deeper dive around that kind of work. So we know we have experts in the audience and experts here on the panel as well. But we're going to be highlighting work that's being done on our campus here at Chicago and on Yunilda's campus at Harvard. And Yunilda used to be with us here at Chicago, so we were sad that she left us, but we're glad to have her back with us today. And so the project, one of the projects we'll be talking about here is Beyond Prisons at Chicago. And Yunilda's going to talk a little bit about her project that she started while here, Grief as Resistance. And so I'm going to just let us go ahead and jump in and say that, again, to repeat that, the kind of work that folks on the stage do, the intellectual work, the activist work, the cultural work, is all engaged in having to do with addressing state violence and mass incarceration. So my first question to all of you as a way of introduction is to talk about what is your primary project now or most recent project that you're working on and what brought you into this kind of work. And do you want to go first, Alice? We have to share the mic.
So it's so great to be here today. Gosh, how do I start? Okay, so I'm Alice Kim, she, her, hers, and I direct what we're calling now Beyond Prisons at the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture. So it's really exciting. I'm I think the newest member of the CSRPC team, just starting this year. Prior to that, I worked with the Posen Family Center for Human Rights and directed the Human Rights Lab, which was focused on mass incarceration and criminalization. And really, it was 5 years also here at the university, and the lab really served as an incubator, I think, for many of the projects that we are continuing to do work on and that you'll hear about some today. I want to give a shout out to a couple of people who are integral to the work of the Human Rights Lab. Michael Fisher, who is here, who's now working in creative writing, worked with us first as a graduate student and then as the program manager and then as an assistant director. So, and now over at creative writing, and also Antoinette Marshbanks, who is also a community leader who has worked very closely with us in the lab and also at CSRPC. And then this panel, I'm excited to be in conversation with everyone on this panel because I feel like it really represents the co-conspirators on campus and off campus that have been dreaming about this question about reimagining the university. This question of reimagining the university, I think, was really integral and very central to all the work of the lab and also now Beyond Prisons, because it really, well, I guess I'll share just several of the projects to give an illustration of the kind of work that we have been doing together. Kathy Cohen earlier mentioned in the first panel the mixed enrollment course that took place at Stateville Prison, which is a maximum security prison about 30 miles outside of Chicago. It was really heartening to hear the parallels in the work that both Lisa and Zelda talked about in the initial panel. I've been working with a collective teaching project called the Prison Neighborhood Arts and Education Project, and we partnered with PNAP, as we call it, lovingly and affectionately, to have this mixed enrollment class at Stateville, which brought 10 University of Chicago students to Stateville, to a classroom at the prison to learn alongside 11 incarcerated students who are enrolled at Northeastern Illinois University. And that's one example of really trying to understand that that there are sites of learning and knowledge that are beyond the academy, and what a site of learning and knowledge that mixed enrollment classroom was. We'll talk more about that later. Some of us also participated in a travel seminar to Alabama, where we, again, had both students and community leaders going to Alabama together to visit sites of resistance, right? Sites of conscience in Alabama and as well here in Chicago, to really learn together about what does it mean to actually think about memory and freedom building. So I'll just say that the work that we have been engaged in here at the university has really been thinking about how do we privilege knowledge of people with lived experience. How do we make visible this crisis of mass incarceration that we have in the United States and really worldwide? How do we make that visible here on our campus? And how do we build real and meaningful relationships and community with communities that are justice impacted? So I will just leave it there and pass it. Yeah.
Before you finish, can you just talk about a little bit about yourself personally and how you got involved in this work, when and how?
So I come to this work by way of Illinois' death row, actually. And so Ronaldo will be talking about our work together that goes back to, gosh, the late 1990s. So since then, right, Ronaldo was on Illinois' death row, and that's how I met him. And so I was politicized and radicalized when I was in college, actually up at Northwestern University. And soon after I graduated from college, I got involved in anti-police violence and anti-death penalty activism. And if folks know, in 1995, there was the well-known case of Mumia Abu Jamal. And I think that his case. He's a former Black Panther who was on death row in Pennsylvania, and he had gotten an execution date. And I think that really mobilized an international community around his case. And that's how I got active in the anti-death penalty movement. And then soon after, became an organizer with an organization called the Campaign to End the Death Penalty. And a group of Black men on Illinois' death row actually organized themselves. They called themselves the Death Row 10. They discovered while they were on death row in law classes that they had self-organized, that they had all been tortured by the same group of white police detectives and officers. They called themselves the Death Row 10, and it was former Commander John Burge and a group of white detectives who worked with him, who systematically tortured Black people from 1972 to 1991. So they had written a letter to the Campaign to End the Death Penalty asking us to be their voice on the outside. And the campaign responded positively. And that's how my relationship with people on death row began. And I think from that point on, we took an approach of organizing with and side by side and alongside people who were on death row, which was a very different approach, I think, than what the anti-death penalty movement had been taking previously, which was dominated, I think, in many ways by lawyers and professionals who took a very different approach that, when you're a lawyer, you see by way of, your responsibility, people on death row as your clients, right? And we took a very different approach. And I think I started meeting people who are on death row. And I think my life was forever changed in terms of how I thought about the world and continue to think about the world, how I thought about my priorities, and how I thought about what it means to be free.
Hey. No, hello, everybody. Y'all look good. Like, y'all should take your own picture, like selfies. But I always stop when I get a chance to be on the panel with my friend Alice and just say thank you. Because one of the things when you hear people talk about, social justice reform and, I have this big thing I'm going to tell y'all, and any professor in here just go on and put it on the side as a side piece, right? But this intellectual, I call it toxic intellectualism. What oftentimes happen is people frame based upon their intellect on what they think should be the question, what they think should be the goal. And I happen to be one of those people who would raise my hand even when I didn't know what to say. And I want to admit that, like, I crashed a lot of planes trying to develop a philosophy that would govern my movement. Because one of the things that happens frequently is people take up too much space, right? And I like to talk, though. So I'll be like, well, we got to figure this out because I'm going to talk. I'm going to say some stuff. And I was told for so many years, shut up, 37 years of incarceration. And so I'm not going to say how long me and Alice been friends, because I also remember while we are so advanced as a society, right? You still don't tell people's age. And so, but we've been doing this for a nice minute. And one of the things I just want to say really quickly is what brings me and what keeps me imagining a better idea of freedom is that I'm still breathing. And I'm still breathing because people cared and people got into the fight, and people, like, rather than saying, okay, let's do, a visual and let's light candles and sing Kumbaya and Jesus take them into your loving arms. But I love the fact that the campaign y'all showed up, be like, wait a minute, like, they tortured people and they, forced confessions out of people. But then I was like, yeah, but they didn't force that one out of me. I have a different conversation that I want, excuse me. Well, what about the guilty? If we're going to talk about real criminal justice reform, how dare we leave out the Ronaldo Hudsons? Because it was my broken action that put me in a cell. But it was the awakening through education, right? Through friendships, actually meeting love while incarcerated, right? And that's what actually makes me laugh now that there's such a lack of love among people out here. And I'm like, I'm going to love for the rest of my life. I think I got about 45, 50 more years left. And I'm like, I'm not going to hate any of y'all. Even if you come after me, I'm going to use that as motivation, right? If you say something bad about me, I'm going to say something nice about you, right? You know what, Ronaldo, you cute. I know I am, right? I mean, that's the type of stuff people struggle with. But for me, I know you're struggling with that. Look like he's so cute, right? But what I do is I remind people that in the midst of the work, you have to be able to breathe. And if you can't make fun of yourself in the midst of the storms, right? When stuff is happening, then you're not going to last long. And one of the things that Alice has proven to me is that, like, you like that, what's that rabbit? Yeah, like you just never quit. And so, but when people, you don't, you have Ronaldo. I'm sorry. Like I'm doing it again. But anyway, so I'm excited to have this conversation because I am doing a lot of work and I am free after so many moons, right, in prison. And I get to look out at beautiful people and say, hey, listen, we can expand this crowd and we can perfect this work if we just put a little bit more love and trust in each other. And that's why I'm excited. And if you don't know, my name is Ronaldo Hudson.
Hello, everyone. I'm Taji Chesimit. I'm a fourth year in the college here at University of Chicago. I also work with Alice as the student coordinator for the Beyond Prisons initiative with the CSRPC. I came to this work in high school, actually. I was a student activist or organizer working with a DOJ consent decree with the city of Portland, Oregon, where I'm from. So I worked and chaired a body that did quote unquote community engaged policing for a few years. And that experience awakened me to a lot of the problems that exist in mostly every country, or excuse me, every state in the country when it comes to policing and when it comes to prisons and when it comes to how we deal with this social problem. And so coming into college, I was already aware that I wanted to be engaged in some way with either police abolition and prison abolition work. And I coincidentally got a chance to take a class with Alice my sophomore year that was ironically called Reimagining Justice in Chicago Police Torture Cases. And on the first day after class, I found myself trying to already connect with Alice to do more work around the community policing research that I was doing. And that boldness and ambition got me to be able to work with Alice starting last year in the final year with the Posen's Family Center for Human Rights. So I worked with her along with a few other awesome grad students and fourth years as the program eclipsed at Posen and then into CSRPC. And it's been one of the best opportunities in my life to really take art and community and the university and leverage that for the better and for justice and for freedom in a way that I couldn't have imagined coming into college, that there would be such a unique opportunity that aligned with so many of my own interests and intersections. And yeah, it's been an incredible 3 or so years now, and hope to continue working, but this is the introduction part, so I'm not going to be as long as you. but yeah, I'm really excited to be here and being conversation with everyone, and yeah.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here after so many years of conspiring with Gina, with Alice on so many of these things and trying to really bring some transformation to these university spaces. Well, I guess I didn't introduce myself. My name is Janilda Gonzalez. I was an assistant professor here for 4 years at SSA, now Crown, with the incredible folks over there. And now I'm at the Harvard Kennedy School. And just by way of introduction, I guess, and sort of what we're talking about here, I'm a scholar of policing, police violence, police reform, and these are issues that I've been working on since I was 19, from an activist perspective in the US and in Argentina, and then entering academia to sort of conduct this research. But the real learning experience for me I think the transformative learning experience for me came, after at that point, like, more than a decade of working and studying about police violence and like literally just reading about it every day and thinking about it every day. But was what I met Deborah Silva, who's a mother from Brazil, who leads one of the most prominent organizations of mothers of victims of police killings in Brazil. And I think this term that you just shared with us, Ronaldo, of toxic intellectualism, she rescued me from potentially a lifetime of toxic intellectualism because she, just shared with me about the challenges of being, an activist leader and on these issues of somebody whose work is shaped by the deep trauma that they've experienced of losing a child to police violence and that continued stigma and criminalization of both the victim and their families. She had been researched many times, and she would share with me, she's like, I think she was recently at an event that I did, and she was like, I think I've been interviewed by like 300 theses, for 300 undergraduate, masters, and doctoral dissertation, theses. And what came out of any of them? She's like, it just sits in a file and, dusty, collecting dust in a library, but sort of what has been achieved through that research. And she similarly shares, like, as you're talking about, Ronaldo, right, this toxic intellectualism of like, the researcher asks you what they want to know, this extractive relationships, they get all this information out of you and then you never hear from them again. And I think that's, the quintessential, practice that we are trained really to do in academia, that you so helpfully characterize as toxic intellectualism. And so one of the things that I can sort of share, the work that grew out of that realization alongside Deborah, and the ways that I've then used, that was like right before I started my first job as a professor. And so then I was like, okay, my mission is just like, how do I use these universities as platforms for them? And, sort of, I don't want to just sort of sit here and talk to you about police violence. I want you to hear directly from the people that live it and are fighting for it, against it every day. And so two projects that I can sort of share more about as we go, that come from the mothers themselves. So the first was the project Grief as Resistance that Tracy talked about, that I did while I was here, and that Alice was also a part of, which was intended to sort of create a number of events, transnational linkages across boundaries, across national borders, across language, across cultures, to bring together mothers of victims of police violence from Brazil, from the US, from Colombia, and to get folks together, even for informal gatherings. We did a dinner with Antoinette and some of the Brazilian moms. And I think Alice was remembering how I was like, spend the whole night translating and I didn't eat anything. And so that, that through that transnational collaborative, which was funded by the University of Chicago, it was not cheap to fly, 10 people to Colombia, to the US, whatever. But it was like real resources from the university that, were instead of like doing more extractive research and more toxic intellectualism, went to really building these transnational linkages through this network. And then the other thing that I can talk about as well is that also came from these conversations with the mothers. And it was actually at one of the gatherings of the Grief as Resistance project, where the mothers started talking about the illnesses that many of them end up with through their struggles with the state for justice. And so by the time I got to Harvard, Deborah was like, and a couple of other moms from Brazil were just like, we really want to do a research project on this. So I was like, okay, let me see how I can find money. Got money from Harvard to do a project. And during the pandemic, 4 mothers from 4 different states in Brazil, me and then a couple of other researchers from Brazil, we met on Zoom every 2 weeks. We developed the research questions together. We developed a reading list. We read, well, you're not going to know them, but a lot of really dope Brazilian intellectuals. Lilia Gonzalez, Paulo Freire, which I guess you guys probably might have heard of, and just really built the project together from scratch. They went out and did the research, interviewed other mothers, and speak very compellingly to the meaning of like mothers interviewing other mothers. And so just the ways that it is actually possible to be within this space and transform it. And I think that Gina's point about inclusion is not just like bringing diverse people in and then like expecting them to adapt to the space, but that the space itself has to transform for them. And so these are just 2 examples of the ways that I'm sort of thinking, okay, how can I, in my own small way, help to transform this space so that it becomes more open for folks who we typically just extract from, right? So I'll stop there. But yeah, and thank you all so much. I'm so happy to be back and to be back here with all of you. Yeah.
We're glad to have you back, Yanilda. Thanks, everybody. And so I think, Yanilda, you were kind of moving in the direction that I was going to ask the other panelists to talk about, because, all of us are sharing examples of, I don't know, successes or ways in which we've been able to, kind of subvert the institutions we find ourselves in, or to be, fugitive scholars or whatever the terms are. But I wanted it to have everybody be a little bit more explicit and to talk about the ways in which, white supremacy, culture, racism, institutional racism, and barriers. What are the barriers to the work that you've encountered? And what is your analysis of the impact of white supremacy on the kind of work that you've been able to do, either in educational institutions or, educational institutions in combination with the criminal legal system, or, other kinds of systems that we encounter in our work? What is the role of white supremacy, Ronaldo?
Hey, everybody that identifies white, would you raise your hand? Okay, put your seatbelts on. like put your seatbelts on. Cause listen, oh my, okay. First, I want to say I love you. I love you, I love you, I love you. But y'all get in the way. Like it's okay to really step back. One of the hurdles that I continually see is really good intending people not being able to see their shadows and how they want you to transform to what makes them comfortable. I want you to really grow, but grow within the boundaries of my whiteness, and people are offended by people calling out the truth. I want to call people in, not call people out, not embarrass people. But if we never have the conversation, it's like they're attempting to erase that slavery happened. You can't even have the conversation. How dare you talk about the goodness of America? The goodness of America is that I'm telling you the truth. That's what make America great, is somebody tell you what you need to hear. And so some of the hurdles, at least for me, has been trying to figure out how to put the cap back on the whiteout.
They may not know what whiteout is.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Although they're like, what?
I'm sorry.
Whiteout.
Well, y'all know what
You don't know what a typewriter is.
Okay, I'm sorry. Like whiteout is. I'm sorry. I'm 59 years young, and so when I was typing inside, they used to have these little bottles, almost like nail polish. I'm going to tell you, right? And it was like, it's called whiteout. And so if you make a mistake, a typing error, you pull the whiteout and you white it out. And so one of the things that happens in spaces is because people really feel comfortable about their whiteness, and it's comfortable, right? And I have benefited since I've been home from a lot of that whiteness, but I've also been traumatized because I'm like, man, I really can't look at you and tell you, hey, listen, please stop underestimating my intellect. Like, don't assume what I don't know because I was incarcerated 37 years. In fact, I probably read more than you, and you still trying to get your PhD. I should already have one, right? And so, but people assume, now here's the rub, I still need help too. And so it's like technology is like, okay, come text some stuff, right? But don't give me your philosophy that has failed the world, right? So one of the things that I did as an example is during my incarceration, I intentionally wrote a philosophy program called The Building Block. And the philosophy around this program was to give autonomy to the incarcerated population and have the staff to surrender what they've been done. They just done such a horrible job at managing, if you will. And their philosophy is you are a so-called quote unquote inmate, offender, et cetera, right? I'm saying, no, I'm a human being who happens to be incarcerated. Quit trying to identify me by a term that allows you to feel okay about disrespecting me, right? And so that's what makes language important, not to police people language, but also to inform people. If you're going to say stuff, if you're going to give the posture that you care, then really care enough to say, you know what, I'm gonna just be quiet and see what y'all do. So when they surrendered to us the space, we really just blew them out of the waters. And so there's thousands and thousands of men and women that are incarcerated that should have their PhD. In fact, you're in Chicago, I'm declaring right now, y'all need to give me an honorary PhD. Y'all figure out how to get it going, right? But I'm saying all this to say, like, you don't have to surrender your whiteness. Just move it around. Like, you know what I mean? Like, move around some and say, okay, how do I amplify someone else? Because it doesn't take away from you to make space for others, right? And quit being mad because saying, "Man, we got to give everything to them. Like, I can't believe I can't be myself." Hey, we've been like stumped on, pookied on for hundreds of years, and we're getting a little attention, and now you're upset. So, with all due respect, if you are an intellectual who happen to identify as white, because I'm looking at this page, it actually looked white with some lines in it, so you're not really white. So even that is enough to make you have to rethink your thinking. So anyway, I don't want to just go off because I will. I just want to say, and really the biggest hurdle for me is people assuming I don't know how, or I can't comprehend, or that you can quote something that, oh, what is that? Another term that make y'all feel good, that you want me to learn. In other words, modify me to make you feel good rather than make room. Like, if you're going to make room, then don't tell me how to enter the room. Invite me into it.
Anybody else want to take that question on?
I'm
Because
sure-
U Chicago just loves to give money to these kinds of programs. Like, what are some of the barriers institutionally that we've encountered in this work?
I wanted to just, I think this connects to your question about barriers and also Gina's really helpful discussion of sort of what white supremacy culture is and how it manifests in our institutions. Because I think that sort of in this work, and I think Alice and I had talked about this a lot too, in trying to sort of create more spaces in the university where the folks that we work with in the community who are survivors of various forms of state violence, who are leading incredible movements for justice, that they can feel welcome in a place like this. And so and like not only thinking about that sort of people outside this university, but even outside the country. And so like in trying to bring together people from, you know, different countries, language has been a huge barrier, and the sort of expectation that, like, you know, well, sure, you're going to bring people from Latin America, but surely they speak English. And so like, and I'm like, well, do you understand who are the people most likely to speak English in a Latin American context? It's going to be sort of the wealthier people, more elite backgrounds. And so you're already drawing from just a biased set of the population. And so like getting people to be patient with translation, waiting for interpretation, waiting for, you know, for all of this stuff to sort of work, to be able to like really hear each other and connect. The kind of administrative burden, like just I just had 4 mothers from Brazil, my collaborators on this research project that I mentioned, come to Harvard, and it was just like weeks of trying to figure out how can I just get them cash so that they can spend while they're here, because the university model of like, well, you just spend whatever you got to spend and then we'll reimburse you maybe 2 to 3 months later if you're lucky, that's just not going to work. It's just not going to work, right? And so then they're like, well, why don't you just stay with them and then you can pay for their meals? And I'm like, I can do that, but like they need to have, like, you know, it's very infantilizing to be like, come and yeah, I'll just pay for your, you know, your meals, right? I was like, I need to be able to get them cash that they can spend. So anyway, it was and that was an issue here when I first started, but here, at least, I think the administrative folks were a lot more understanding. They helped me get cash to them that they could spend while they were here. I was not able to get it done at Harvard, had to find other workarounds, but that's always the thing of having to constantly find workarounds. Has been a big barrier. And I think that that's like the quintessential, you know, manifestation of white supremacy culture, is sort of like, you know, you got to do it under the table, figure out how did you get things done so that people can at least feel that this is a space for them, that like you don't have to come here with your, you know, already independent funds that you bring here. You don't have to speak English. You can come here and just be yourself. And then just very briefly, sort of what Gina mentioned, just always learning so much from Gina. right, is that this epistemic bigotry, right? This sense of surely these are not the speakers. So like when the first event that I did at SSA Crown, one of my senior colleagues, as I was walking around with these like 3 Brazilian women who are, Afro-Brazilian women who are just incredible activists in each of their respective spaces, and like, very prominent figures in Brazil. And then she's like, "Oh, is this your family?" And I'm like, no, they're the speakers of our event that we're doing. Like, they're on the poster. So, right, but it's just that epistemic bigotry, right? It's sort of like who gets to be the guest speakers in these spaces. So I think that those are just sort of 3 of those barriers that you are talking about, Tracy, that like are just clear manifestations of that white supremacy culture that we are just really trying to break down any way possible.
Yeah, so I'll build on what Yanilda and Ronaldo have said to say that the prison system is not only steeped in white supremacy, but actually an outgrowth of it. And I think Michelle Daniel Jones offers a way to look at the neoliberal university by actually calling the university an extension of the carceral state. And I think that that's a useful way because, as she puts it, you see the same sort of epistemic injustice in both places, right? So you have to begin to make those kinds of connections. But I think that a real barrier, a real something that's very real about white supremacy and the culture of white supremacy is the way that it invisibilizes and erases people, especially people who are justice impacted, right? So we all know the statistics, right? 2 million and counting in terms of how many people are incarcerated in the United States. More than 11 million people circle through like detention centers, jails, probation, mandatory supervision, the ankle chains that exist, right? In Illinois, we actually have 53,000 people that are locked up. We have the Cook County Jail, which is just a few miles away. We have Stateville Prison. We have prisons all across the state. We continue to have youth detention centers in the state. And yet, the people who are behind bars are essentially disappeared from our everyday lives, from our communities. They're disappeared and they're also othered. So one of the things that Angela Davis says about prisons is that it's not just a place, but prison is an ideology, and it's an ideology that others people who are incarcerated. And I think that othering means that people get erased from our lives, right? And that's what we have to, I think that's the challenge, right? Like, how do we refuse this carceral logic that others and disappears people? And also in justice impacted communities. I know when I first started working with the mothers of people who are on death row, it's a heartbreaking story to hear that Gloria Johnson tells it better than I do, but she was the mother of Montel Johnson, and Joanne Patterson was the mother of Aaron Patterson. And they actually worked in the same building, and they went on cigarette breaks together every day, and they saw each other, outside having a cigarette. And it wasn't until years later when these organizing spaces, when they met each other in organizing spaces, that they realized that they both had sons who are on death row who knew each other, because it was something that you didn't share at your workplace. So I think that's the kind of invisibility and erasure that happens. And by coming together in community with one another, right, they were able to, Luva Bell, who was another mother, said it was by coming together with other mothers and other activists that she was able to hold her head up high and organize with these mothers. And then they created these signs, right, with their sons' pictures on them. And they went everywhere with these signs, to Washington, D.C., to the Illinois State Capitol, to City Hall, right? And I think they were saying, you will not erase us, we will be here. And I think those are the kinds of barriers. And I do think that creating platforms for people who are justice impacted, people who are behind bars is one of the most important things that we can do because of the challenges people have actually making their demands, telling their stories, asserting who they are. The state tells a very particular kind of story about who is behind bars. It dehumanizes people, it criminalizes people. On death row, it said, these are the people who are the worst of the worst, right? Now, much of my work is focused on people who have life sentences, which is another kind of death sentence. The same thing. This is the worst of the worst. These are the monsters. When I started working with people who are on death row and now what we call life row, once you meet people, it's a very, very, it's not the monsters that, even President Obama, I remember, was saying, okay, well, I only reserve the death penalty for the worst of the worst, the monsters, right? And, that is not who I am meeting when I meet people on death row. I know Ronaldo changed my life, right? I learned so much from Ronaldo and the other men and women on death row about, what it actually means to be a human being and how we need to and ought to live our lives. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that theme about, being a human being. And I think it feeds into the idea of practicing freedom, like even practicing freedom while you're incarcerated or while you're on death row or while you're, a student being first introduced. And I wanted to try to get Taji back in the conversation and ask you, Taji, if you could talk a little bit about, you said, little did you know that you would end up in the spaces you've been in as a student here at this, very elitist university. Can you talk a little bit about some of the experiences you have had of practicing freedom in your engagement with this work?
Yeah, sure. I think it's very interesting taking classes. I mean, I take majority classes that are with white students or students that aren't also Black, and most of what I study is around Black studies, around prisons, around carceral situations, and how it impacts people and the communities around us. And I think it's very interesting how often we're very removed in the classroom setting from the actual people that we're talking about, the solutions that we're proposing. And I think particularly to an example, I did have a chance to be in this first mixed enrollment course that was taught last year with Professor Cohen and Alice. And that was, a type of experiential learning, a site of learning that is unlike any other. I'm very excited. It's going to be offered again this year for students to take a chance with that course. And I think in the first day of the course, we had an opportunity. We were introducing ourselves. We were beginning to get into the Underground Scholars text about how we should talk about people who are incarcerated. And a discourse started between two guys, Michael Sullivan, I believe, and Reginald Beauclair. And was it Michael Bell? I'm sorry. It was Michael Bell, excuse me. And both of them were debating over this idea of freedom and this idea of if you are in, what they call social death in prison, can you be free if your mind is free? Can you be free if you're materially not free? And it's not an answer I have, but it was a discussion that they had and that continued to be a sort of lingering theme. And it was very interesting. A lot of the students from outside were silent during this, where it was very interesting, just to listen to them discuss amongst themselves about this idea. And obviously they were aware that they were talking about this to students who are all going to leave at the end of the day and go on to their own lives for the rest of the weekend. And there's a very particular tension there that we have to balance when we were going in and understanding the freedom that we held, but then the sort of the intellectual freedom that we had being with each other, and that sort of freedom that was maybe more limited, but nonetheless valuable and important, because having connections across the wall beyond the prison wall is is tantamount to all we can really do right now in regards to education in prisons, without the walls that exist. Until we can break those walls down, what mixed enrollment offers is a chance to engage in intellectual discussions and really practice a type of freedom that I don't think the college campus here provides, where there's a lot of what Ronaldo calls toxic intellectualism, or another phrase I've heard a professor call it is the performance of brilliance, where there's a lot of people wanting to act as if because they came here, because they are endowed with what this university espouses, then therefore we are the only people, the only leaders who are supposed to be able to solve these solutions with whatever models, economic models we can come up with, So it's practicing freedom as a student and practicing freedom as an activist. Both feel like it's as much as I can do for the people that I work with, for the friends of mine who are inside, is all what I feel like is the most closest to freedom that I can provide and that I can share. And it's not something that should have to be sort of paternalistic or it shouldn't have to be a way where one provides to another. It should be something that everyone enjoys and has the ability to live in.
Ronaldo, did you want to get in on the practicing freedom?
Yeah, I want to walk really carefully with this. Intellectual stimulation is completely separate from freedom. And so while people can go in with all due respect and be stimulated and excited by, look, I'm surprised that you are actually brilliant, right? Versus what freedom actually is. Freedom is getting to the place where my intellectual stimulation begins to point me toward the wall and I start pushing against that damn wall, right? Freedom is resisting the language that imprisons. And so it is a connection. While I do have a philosophical difference or preference about intellectual stimulation through courses, right? Versus fighting against what Alice mentioned briefly about systemic racism that the Department of Lies actually train people to govern the space by. And so one of the things I try to share with people is it is our real fight for freedom is to change the philosophical belief that people have that it's okay to imprison people, right? It's not just the moral fiber, because people can make moral arguments about almost anything. Like, how dare you not throw that plastic container in the garbage can and be outraged and will cancel you. You're not a recycler, right? But yet you walk right past or drive past prisons and not even give it a thought. Freedom for me, Alice, was when I had the conversation with you and the Death Row 10 was talking and they were doing a live from Death Rows. And I was saying, hey, like, what about the guilty? Like, freedom was being able to have my voice like heard. And that's or live from Death Row were these conversations of men and women that were in prison on death row would call into a place like this, right? Like, we should do it too for the men of life row right now. And we would be able to talk to people and you would hear people like Stanley Howard, hey, no, Alice, yo, they say death row, we say hell no, death row. And like remind people of his humanity. And I would be like, hey, excuse me, over here, I'm responsible for the act, but I'm not the act, And I think freedom is being able to even separate that, like unpack that, intellectuals, right? Because we've been made to believe, no, you are that thing. You are that title, right? While I have a title as director of education for the Illinois Prison Project, I'm not that. That's my, vocation, right? But if you go to social media or you look, you'll be like, oh no, he is that dude. That's what he is. No, I'm not. I'm a brother that made it through all the sewage, all the stinky stuff. I swam past all those turds that was thrown into the sewage that I was dwelling in, that they try to make people comfortable in. And when the light came on, it's called intellectual stimulation. oh, this is sewage, and that liquid stuff is not pool water, it's urine. And they want you to swim in it and act like it's okay. And then taxpayers' money is paid to keep putting more sewage on people, right? So that you can't smell me. So the residue of my incarceration, like, is kind of hard when you come to visit. You're like, why you smell like that? Well, they don't have showers. And we're fighting for water right now. So freedom is not just a imagination, but an action, right? I know the possibility of winning because I'm a physical manifestation of what the system said can't be and wouldn't be, right? Yeah, y'all could clap for that. That's real. Like, I'm gonna tell you why I say that, and I really mean that. I ain't being funny. Because when you look at us and you think about us, you say, you know, that formerly incarcerated person, right? I'm like, that. No, the person that was incarcerated, I'm not an expert because of my incarceral experience. I'm an expert because while I was experiencing it, I was studying it. And I was saying, why does this exist? And how can I be better than my worst decision? And I became an expert in that because I refused to let the system define me and tell me what I was. I am not a monster. I'm not a monster. I was a young kid that made a horrible decision. Now I'm a grown man that's saying power only yield to greater power, right? Like the university. Like, I think there should be $200 million dedicated to this work, to the lab, so we could be like, look, we don't have to wonder what we can do. And that will happen. I imagine that kind of freedom, if you want to talk about freedom, because cars don't move without gas. Y'all know it. This movement don't move without cash. And I'm only saying that because it don't, right? And so, like, freedom is really, like, the commitment to the university, and I don't care if they get mad. I love them, but I don't care. If you really love this work, then put your money where your mouth is, right? Cut the checks. And when you do that, then you can sit in those small rooms and say, we're really making a difference, right? So freedom to me is not having to scratch and, I hope we can make this happen, right? And inside prison, freedom for me was I saw past the bars. Do you get that? And I strive every day to make every person that I know or don't know in prison remember, look past them damn bars, right? Don't try to be in, because and I'm going to say, I really will shut up, I promise. The people that you have access to in them classes is the cream of the crop, according to the system. If you go back on the gallery, you have some Rhodes Scholars that they won't give access to the classroom because they're real revolutionaries and they're resisting anything the system says. Everything you say, hey, why is there cheese on the sandwich? Where you make that cheese? Like, they're challenging. And systems of oppression don't like what?
Thank you. I was gonna. Did you want to go ahead?
Okay. I want to okay, so Devon Terrell is a human of Life Row, right? We have this project called Humans of Life Row, and it is comprised of men and women who are serving life sentences. And in Illinois, every life sentence is actually life without the possibility of parole, or serving virtual or de facto life sentences of 20, 30, 40 years or more. And this was a narrative project where it actually started. It was intended to be an oral history, but because of the pandemic, it became a written narrative project where we sent in prompts and people responded to those prompts. And one of the things that Devon Terrell said is that, and it became sort of the mantra of Humans of Life Row, is I walk into the future by visualizing it today. And I think for me, that is so important because I feel like, Ronaldo, you had this vision of your own freedom, right? When you were on death row, and Ronaldo actually I mean, you can tell the story better than I can, but people may not know this about his story is that he gave up his appeals process, admitted guilt, and really created and paved his own pathway to freedom. This was in the 1990s when if you stood on a street corner, and as someone said at a panel that I was at recently, they said, oh yeah, this was an undocumented young person who said, when we started doing our work around, being undocumented and coming out of the shadows, we actually had to have paper petitions, that those are things of the past. But same with us, we had paper petitions, and we actually used to stand on the street corners here of Hyde Park asking people to sign petitions supporting the abolition of the death penalty. And, there were times where people were really hostile, right? It was a very different political climate. And then you had what some people call the Innocence Revolution in Illinois, where innocent people were coming off of death row. And in the midst of that, right, I think Ronaldo decided, I'm going to create a different pathway, right, for myself. I'm admitting my guilt in this thing, but that even though the state of Illinois insists that there is nothing irredeemable about me, I know that that is not the case. And I think that was having that imagination and vision was the start, and it's not the end. And I do think that not all prison education classes, I'm not saying that they're the panacea to this problem that we have. But if you organize the space in a certain kind of way, which I hope that we can try to do, it creates a space where people can begin to imagine with one another a different kind of future. And I do think that that's where things can begin, but they can't end there. If you think that it's going to begin and end there, then you're not going to actually address the problem, the systemic problems that actually exist. So I think, that debate that Taji mentioned, which Kathy has called the beautiful debate, right? It captured all of our imaginations in the sense of really compelling us to think differently about what freedom is, and also, what justice is. So I think that you can begin to practice freedom, right? Because it's all filled with contradictions, right? This work is every time we step inside the prison, we are, you feel complicit with this prison system that cages human beings, right? Because we have to abide by all of their rules, where I don't know how much time and energy and labor goes into thinking about, well, what can I bring in? What can I bring in? Is this going to be censored? Just navigating the prison bureaucracy and what the state says, because their job is to hold people captive, right? And to cage people. Our job is very different. So it's bound to come at odds with one another. But I think that there are ways that you can, dealing with these contradictions, acknowledging these contradictions, and then creating space for us to begin to practice the kind of freedom that we want to see.
Quickly. No, it is important, because I've talked. Oh, I thought you was signaling. Shut up. No, people love me. They speak truth to me, and I could take it. Like, okay. But I love that you made that point, because like, I know people may find it strange that I use the expression, I'm so privileged right now. Like, I have such privilege. And when I was inside pushing for the building block program, like, I struggled with what I knew was a strategy I had to take. And the image is like you working with them people. And when someone said that to me, the first thought popped in my head was, who the you think you talking to? Like, and I wanted to pull out my old stuff, right? But then I say, you're right. I am working with them people, but I know. But I'm like, I had to admit that, because in order to get the program going, they had to allow it to happen. And so I'm like, okay, the price that I'm going to pay to make this happen, because I could see past them. I could play chess, right? I see past this move. And I knew my guys didn't in the beginning. They saw it after they say, oh, wait a minute, they getting ice cream. I know that might sound weird saying that the grown man talking about, why are you saying ice cream like that? Because in prison, everything is restricted. And so it dawned on me, like, I know the stuff that be in the warehouse. I know the stuff that be in the school building. And I'm like, if I could get a wing that's mine, and then I could say, hey, Warden, we should, like, the guys are doing wonderful. Let's go to the warehouse and get ice cream for everybody. And he was like, yeah. I said, that's wonderful, because we don't know what to do with that stuff. And so I was like, y'all just don't know. This is finna blow this program up. And so I'm saying that to say that I'm not above working with anyone that wants to make change and progress for our people. But sometimes we allow ourselves to be shamed out of the game, right? And I'm like, no, you got to strike me out. Like, I am not tapping out, you know? And so I just want to name that, because I think sometimes that get lost in the conversation of, like, what stuff do you have to put up with? And one of the things, I have so much love for the mothers and people like you, specifically Alice, that you don't know when you're inside how much people put up with just to get in there, and the way in which they'll strip you out, you know what I mean, and try to model, minimize who you are, and humiliate you with stuff. And so I just want to name that, like, I learned that if we were going to be successful, I had to have a working relationship with the wardens. I had to begin to have a working relationship with staff. And it wasn't easy, because I knew how racist they were, because I had access to them. And so I used to hear stuff that I'd be like, man, this devil did not just say that out loud, right? And then have to move past it, because I'm like, if I make an issue with this issue, right, when you talk about the obstacles and the problems with racist, so white supremacist power structures, being able to say, I'm gonna shut up at this moment, because it's 80 people in the program right now, and all of them, right, is getting access to good time now. And when you start doing those, deductions, doing algebra, if you will. So anyway, I just wanted to name that is a part of this, is understanding we do, and I did work with them people to help our people.
Thank you. And we all are working with them people over here too, who allowed us to be in their space and have this conference. But I wanted to, before we open it up to the audience, I wanted to get to the second half of the title of the panel, Making Just Futures, and to ask each of the panelists to talk about what justice looks like and what are some of the practices that you are engaged with in your work that lean toward justice. Maybe I'll start with you, Nilda.
Well, I never want to presume to know, what any of these things mean, but just like I said, for me, the most important thing is to just keep. I was at a meeting with different faculty at Harvard that work sort of either in policing or the criminal legal system, and somebody used this great phrase, which was about, like, she said, I want to share Harvard. Right. And so being able to sort of share our universities, share our institutions, so that we're not the ones that have to sort of define these things, that we so when I was here, and this phrase actually came from working with Dorothy Holmes, who's also a mother of a victim of police violence here in Chicago, Ronald Johnson. But Dorothy was just like, we were talking about, like, let's do an event, let's do something. And she was just, she was just sort of riffing. And she was like, sort of, what does justice look like? Some of the things that we wanted to talk about in the event. And so then, I just like started a whole series, a discussion series of what justice looks like. And the whole idea was just to bring folks on the ground who are fighting for justice to tell, to think together what justice looks like. And it's a series that I've continued at Harvard, and open up that conversation transnationally as well. And so I think that for me, being able to share whatever space I'm in, sort of, not close the door behind me, but like break down the door, the windows, whatever, so that, everybody can get in with me. I think that has to be a collective construction. It has to be everybody at the table, not being, not having somebody, publishing papers talking about you, but you are actually, maybe you're a co-author, maybe you're, you're up on the stage talking about it too. It's a much more horizontal, reciprocal, space of sharing power, of collective construction. I think that can be the only way. And like maybe we can get to be those people that make the decisions at some point, and we can be different from than people without transforming the institution, not letting it transform us. I think that's a lot of the ways that I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, partly having something like Beyond Prisons have $200 million funding is something I imagine that's like part of having a just future. And that's mainly to say that like having universities recognize, I mean, we're in Hyde Park, but often people don't associate with the community around and don't see it as much of attachment. They'll say, oh, I'm going back to campus. They don't really even see it as a place that people live in, that people have lived in for generations. And I think that disconnect is only being really bridged with initiatives like Beyond Prisons, and I'm sure there are others, but it does a lot of the work of connecting to the community, working with the community in a way that is just, because I don't imagine that spending, for example, like $215 billion on prisons and police in this country solves social problems. I think abolishing the conditions to which prisons were supposed to solve is bringing us towards a just future. And I think, that starts with not spending as much money as we do on prisons and police, and spending that money in more community oriented ways. I think that will definitely push us in a better direction. And I think the university, is incumbent on the university to do that. It's incumbent on any university to do that, because you are not just settlers on that land, and you do not just have that land for whatever purpose you want to have to continue churning out econ majors. Is not necessarily the answer to the social problems of our world. And I think the better we do to push against that, to push the bounds of what the university allows and what the university can be, I think moves us in a stronger and a more just direction.
I ain't messing with y'all. That was good. Hey, Dollar. There go one of the survivors, y'all. Give them love. Like, I think that's so important. Like, we be in these spaces and don't realize how much pain be here. I love you, man. I ain't seen you. Okay, I'm back. No, thank you. Like, cause I want to be clear. I really respect academia. Like, some of my bosses, most of my bosses are some of the smartest women in the world. I don't really know a lot of smart dudes. Like, I don't. Most of us, like, not you, Dolly, you smart. But I'm saying, like, you, come on. Okay, say something smart. See, that's not smart. This is a $14 watch. You gotta do better than that. Like, the costume, jewelry, baby, optics. I would not spend no money like that for no. It's costume. The ladies knew that. Like, that ain't real. So I'm just saying, I'm back. I didn't do nothing, Tracy. I didn't. But no, y'all, look serious. Like, I think what makes me really proud of moments like this is that when we come together and begin to have these conversations, like I tease them so much. Like, Renata, like, don't he talk so proper? I'd be like, I'm gonna try to sound like that, or as you walk through the university. I'm like, was okay. I'm back. Anyway, would y'all stop playing? This is serious. Y'all play too much. I don't even know what else. Sorry, like, I'm not justice. I don't know if we ever saw it, so I don't know. I think what would be just is that the university turned its purse over to us, right? And then the justice would follow it, right? But I think, and I keep saying it because I really mean that we are more powerful than we give ourselves credit. And I think that when we align ourselves up and really begin to think about strategically, hey, okay, what can we do? What can we ask for, right? Listen, let the community surround this compound. You'll see what they'll do. They'll turn the purse loose, right? And we wait for like big, horrible things to happen. Then we march, then we protest. And as y'all can see it now, they're over George Floyd. So now they're pulling back. Like, we don't need to be talking about social justice anymore. Like, heck, we spent $18 on that. So justice would be that we don't have to cry about, someone in a uniform kicking the door in, or law enforcement asking for trauma treatment, but they want to treat people that they're supposed to be serving. Like, it traumatizes them. Like I tell people, when I came home after 37 years of incarceration, they gave me a parole officer to patrol my trauma rather than a therapist to help me unpack it. And so if we start really thinking about, like, how do we do better with that, that would be justice. To let someone sit there and deal with some of the stuff that Alice had to deal with. Because I'd be calling Alice, hey, Alice, you know what I'm thinking? And because I'm throwing out, y'all. And I tell people, it's like, can you imagine being put in a time capsule in 1983? And then not only put in a time capsule, I was put in the freezer. And then in 2020, when I came home, they just set it loose, like, go be free. Huh? During COVID, I was happy though, because I'm free. Everybody was like, the world would be so much better if you just know COVID just took over the world. I'm like, COVID is my friend right now. Like, I'm free because of COVID. Like, that storm created the atmosphere that pushed me out of prison. I'm not happy with the loss of lives. With all due respect, I hate that people lost their lives. But my experience and my entry back into society, or what's called society, right? Because I was in a society, to be clear, right? And some of the most loving, most powerful people that you ever want to meet, some of the most, like the think tank, like it's brothers sitting in prison with master degrees and they don't want to let them out. Like, that's ready to get into the work. No, we can't let them out. Why? Because you don't care and you don't see the value, right? Because it goes against the system that you've created. Like, the system of correction is not created to produce intellectuals, right? It's the university and, the Alice Kims and the professors that go in and say, I challenge you to think a little bit more. What would you do if you had the chance? What would be your plan? So for me, justice is us having these conversations, like, so that people can get real access to real information. Justice to me is that everyone in this room tag the university and remind them of the power of these moments and why we want more of it. And so we leverage our power and say, we're grateful, right, that you support it, but do more. That's justice, right? It's not just like, I ate that wonderful sandwich outside, it was good. That was a moment and I'm gonna drop it. Justice, y'all, for me is being free enough to speak and say what I want to say without fear of being locked in segregation. And so my freedom, to me, is an example of justice.
So Ronaldo and I have both mentioned the men at Stateville, the think tank, the scholars in the mixed enrollment class. And I actually do want to invite all of you, because we are doing our form of live from Life Row. In 2 weeks, the think tank is going to be presenting at the National Conference on Higher Education in Prison. They're going to be Zooming in. Ronaldo and I will be in Atlanta, where the conference is being held, facilitating from there. But I just recently learned that there is going to be a webinar link made available. So maybe we can send out to everybody who registered for this conference the link to that, because then you can meet. Our session is called Humans of Life Row, Narrating Our Lives and the Power of Education. So I want to invite folks to that. And I think that this question about justice is a really hard one. It's one that we keep asking ourselves, because I think in some ways, justice is something that feels so elusive to us. And I think, over the years, what I've learned is that what we kind of have been sold as what justice is, pertaining to our criminal justice system, is not really that at all, that there are so many limitations to the criminal legal system, right? And that it is not an avenue where you can actually find justice. And I know that in the Chicago police torture cases, that was certainly the case. It's why the Death Row 10 organized themselves, because they were trying to go through the criminal legal system. They were getting nowhere with the appeals process. The city of Chicago, the powers that be were all complicit in the systematic torture that happened. How could they not be? 1972 to 1991, right? And I think that the reparations ordinance here in Chicago, I mean, it started, the first known instance of torture was 1972, right? This is just under John Burge and his ring of torturers, right? The web exceeds, continues beyond that. The net continues beyond that. But 1972 and 2015 is when we actually finally won reparations ordinance, the first ever in the country, for police torture, right? And it took 4 decades to get there. And I think that the reparations ordinance offered a modicum of justice, right? It was just the beginning of what people deserved who were tortured by the state. But certainly not the end, right? And it include, in some ways, I think it does gesture towards the kind of justice that we want to see. It included financial reparations, a financial component. It included a curriculum that is now being taught in Chicago public schools about police torture to 8th and 10th graders. It included the Chicago Torture Justice Center, which Damon Weston, who Ronaldo called out, is an organizer at Chicago Torture Justice Center. So the only psychological counseling center in the whole United States that actually serves domestic survivors of police violence, of state violence, right? And it includes the building of a permanent memorial so that we can actually have a physical symbol that says never again, right? And it included free tuition to community colleges, not just for the survivors themselves, but also for their grandchildren, since we know that trauma is intergenerational. So I think those kinds of things gesture towards what we need to have in order to begin to say that we have any sort of meaningful justice. But I think it's a really hard question, because I think when we say, okay, the legal system doesn't deliver justice, I mean, I think that we can nod our heads. Maybe some people say, well, what do you mean the legal system doesn't doesn't lead to or deliver justice? And I wasn't going to go there, but I'm inspired by Lisa, who said earlier this morning, we don't have to be perfect in what we're saying, but I think that it's hard when you think about people who when harm has been done, when people's lives have been lost, when horrible things happen, and then how do you reconcile that with like every single person who is, for example, in the think tank serving a life sentence and needing to get freedom? I'm thinking about this because yesterday at the think tank, we actually had the mother of someone who lost her son to violence. Her son was murdered, and she came in and we were having a very hard conversation because her son's killer is now up for a new trial. This is somebody who actually, in her victim impact statement years ago, called for mercy because she, for her son's killer, even though at the time he did not admit guilt, he pled not guilty. He was convicted. He's serving time. Now he was able to win a new trial. What she wants from him is for him to admit his guilt, right? And he, in his new trial, is not admitting guilt. And we understand in many ways that because the justice system isn't actually about getting to the truth, that in order to be able to get out of this situation where you're subjected to state violence every day and caged as a human being, that you may not choose to admit guilt. You might choose a different legal strategy. And then that is what is also denying this mother what she needs to heal, right? And what she needs to do. And it was a very, very difficult and emotional conversation to have with all men who are serving life sentences, who are trying to fight for their own way out. And I think I bring it up because we have to ask those hard questions. We have to make ourselves uncomfortable. And even when we don't have the answers, we need to begin to get at it. Or I don't know, where are we going to find justice? Yeah, so I'll share that.
Okay, I think it's time for us to open it up to the audience to get involved in the conversation. Do we have mics? We don't have mics. But do we have any questions or comments from the floor? There's somebody right there. She's gonna bring you the mic.
Hi. Being at the institution that we're at and a lot of higher education institutions, there's an emphasis on when you're in classrooms on even for people who want to make action, who want to do good work. A lot of our only exposure is through an author's interpretation of an issue and their solutions and why they think other people's solutions won't work. So my question is, do you think that all this theory and thought experiment actually hinders action in any way? And in what ways, if you think so?
I think as a student, it's our responsibility to bring up what we see as the relation to theory and how it relates to our real lives, to the contemporary times that we're in. Right before this, I came from my discussion group and we were talking about this really great sociologist, Wilson, who writes about the decline of the significance of race. It's a very famous race theory or essay or whatever. But the topic is very pertinent now because a lot of people nowadays are race is elusive. It's a concept that's being debated of whether we could even teach it. How is it taught? So it's like I think there's a lot of through lines, and it's about how much your own personal engagement with the events of the world around you, or even just your own circumstances that you want to draw, your own experience from to relate it to the theory. I think often classes will try and lean into how you can use the author's idea. And I think people write in particular times in history, and how they write, they should always be aware is unfinished, right? And the way history is told is unfinished. And I think we have a responsibility as young scholars to try and continue to write that history and to change the history in the classrooms, having intellectual conversations that push against the bounds of what for example, authors' arguments may be, Hopefully that answers your question.
Do you feel like that's encouraged in your class?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, so it's definitely a contrarian thing, and it sometimes it'll literally be me saying something and then no one responds to it because they don't know what to say to it because it's not what they're used to, right? But it doesn't mean it shouldn't be said. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't make your papers all about how you can relate to what is happening in the world, to what's happening in a lot of just contemporary crises around the world that relate to the topics we're talking about. They write them because they know that they're hopefully going to have an impact in the future. And obviously they do if we're sitting in classrooms talking about it. So why not relate it to the world around us?
Hi, I'm really curious about this idea of that people tend to stay in clusters of what they know or what they're passionate about. So everyone here is passionate about this conversation. And you were talking earlier about getting to know people on death row, getting to know people who are on life row, and understanding this idea about the connectedness between humans. And I'm curious to understand, how does that translate to people who aren't sitting in this room? People who don't want to see me as a human, as a Black woman, or a person who's on death row as a human? How do you get that outside of the university, outside of the classroom, into the understanding of someone who is shying away from that, who wouldn't come to a place like this, this panel?
Ronald, oh.
No, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think this is always a perpetual question, right? Is how do we make sure that we're not just having conversations amongst ourselves, right? People who already agree with us. And it's always a big frustration of mine because, this is a very well attended event, but sometimes you organize something and it's like, there's like 10 people or whatever. And I'm just like, there's a lot of lip service and even sort of in my, I'm at the Kennedy School of Government, and there's a lot of people who literally are going to go on to rule the world in various ways. And so you want to, even people who don't agree with you or who don't think that they have anything to learn from you, that to be at the table but that's always like our big challenge, is sort of how do we reach out to people who maybe do believe in the criminal justice system and believe in policing and believe in all this stuff. Sort of how do we have these broader conversations, because that's who we need to convince. And I don't have a good answer to that, other than that to just try to create spaces for dialogue, to sort of in a general class that I teach about politics and ethics, how can I bring in these ideas whether they're not expecting to hear about why it's important to hear directly from the community members that are like going to be affected by the policies that you all are going to create, that is a question of ethics, et cetera. So sort of introducing it in indirect ways to people who may not be expecting it. And I teach a class on policing, and I have students who are everything from hardcore abolitionists to active duty police officers, and so that's those moments of encounter, of dialogue, of just sort of try to expose people to ideas that they are not going to necessarily be comfortable with, but that will sort of get the ball rolling so that we don't just continue to have these conversations among ourselves. But yeah, that's always that like perennial disappointment. Sort of, I was just just to go long, but I was just doing fieldwork in Brazil in August when 3 states simultaneously, there was just an explosion of police violence, including in the state where I work in Sao Paulo. And the mothers that would accompany them, we would do these rallies, and there were very, very, very small numbers of people, despite the fact that the police was, in the span of like the 2 weeks that I was there, I think it was 30 people that were killed by police. It was 50 in the state of Bahia. And the rallies were so small. And so it was just this sense of like, we're just here sort of talking to our, to ourselves. And so I think that is a huge question of justice, of sort of about expanding the sort of circle of people that we're talking to. I think it is important to have those moments of only talking to ourselves as well. But I think that's always a perennial question, of sort of how do we influence people, because that violence is gonna continue, because those folks are not hearing the pain that those police operations where they say they're fighting drugs, they're actually, they're just killing people. So yeah, anyway, I don't have a helpful answer for that, but it's one that just constantly thinking about, and sort of how do I get people who in spaces that they may not be expecting it to engage with ideas and with people that they don't necessarily have engagement with.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that question. I really think it is like the $6 million question. And I think the way that I think about it is just what we know and what we think, what is sort of culturally dominant, and how we can shift perceptions is very much tied to and connected to 2 things. One is social movements, right? So I think that, for example, if you think about the struggles for justice in the Chicago police torture cases and the reparations ordinance, that was one. I mean, that was hard fought for. And when we first introduced the ordinance in the Illinois legislature, most of the alder people thought it was a pipe dream. They thought, why are we raising something that's so controversial? Can we just call it something else? Reparations is so divisive. There's no money in the budget, so on and so forth. But we were literally told, you all are crazy for even thinking about this. And the last time the state of Illinois tried to consider reparations, like that didn't succeed, right? So, but then the Black Lives Matter movement happened. And I think that movement around the country and around the world did more to change people's minds and the sort of collective consciousness about the police than anything. But I don't want to give short shrift to what people often talk about, like, oh, we're talking to ourselves and preaching to the choir, because we had those meetings with only 10 people showing up, because we had those rallies that were small, right? That we were in the place, right? To when the movement erupted in the way that we did, so many young people, right? Kathy Cohen talked about the Black Youth Project, right? Were able to connect themselves to the reparations ordinance, and we were able to fight side by side with one another and go to City Hall every single week demanding the reparations ordinance. And it was under those conditions, and other things as well. The mayoral runoff happened, and leveraging that situation. But I think that these major cultural shifts can happen because of social movements. And then I also think that it is culture. How do we create cultural productions that can reach more people than maybe these kinds of right? Like, how do we create the films? And the think tank, the Humans of Life Row is a narrative project. We're doing storytelling. There was a storytelling performance that we have filmed, right? The men actually also wrote their own play about themselves and their own lives, which was also filmed, right? And so the idea is we just co-organized an exhibition here called Makes Me Wanna Holla. Art, Death, and Imprisonment, right? And that brings in a whole new kind of crew audience, right? Of people who might not come to this kind of program, but want to come to an art exhibit, right? And there was contained artworks from incarcerated artists, formerly incarcerated artists, but it really centered, the experience of incarceration. So I think that we also need to be creating our own media, our own art out there. And the men in the think tank, they want to do PSAs. We're having a Humans of Life Row exhibition at Co-Prosperity Sphere, and they want to do PSAs, and they want students to work with them to do sort of a social media campaign leading up to this, because they want it very much to be tied to, how do we dispel the myth of who we are to people, so we can, people won't be afraid. Oh, people are afraid of things like parole. If you let somebody out, there's still the Willie Horton syndrome that, oh, you let somebody out and then they're going to commit another horrific crime. So legislators won't support even modest bills, not radical bills, but just for people to get rid of life without the possibility of parole, and provide the opportunity for people to have earned reentry in their lives. So I think cultural production is also another important factor.
Thanks for bringing that up, Alice, because I wanted to talk a little bit about Ronaldo and how many of us on this campus met Ronaldo was as an artist, and people who are a part of our Centering Race Consortium also have been working with the arts and trying to figure out how to include study of race and considerations of race and racism through the arts. But Ronaldo's a painter, is an amazing painter and artist who we brought into our community as our inaugural Artist for the People practitioner fellow that was supported by our Mellon grant. And he spent a year with us. We had an amazing exhibition of his work in this building. But I don't know, Ronaldo, if you wanted to say a little bit about the role of art in your political work as well, and your experience of the University of Chicago as an artist.
Yeah, but I do want to just step back to that question, because for me, I do want to say it's just tapping people on the shoulder and just inviting them to a conversation. I think we've gotten away from simple things, and this goes to my experience as the artist for the people here. Like, I would come over here like this was my joint. Like, I'm serious. Like, and then I realized that my art was on display in the cafeteria. So I'm just saying, like, I'm just saying, like, I found out because people was in there eating, and I was starting to talk about some art, and they was like, "Oh," I'm like, "Excuse me," like, and so, but it was wonderful too. I don't want to minimize. Like, it was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me. To feel the love and the access and to have the resources to do what I wanted to do, and not have the restrictions of the Department of Corrections, because as an artist inside, you have to be covert. Like, you have to be careful, like cloak stuff, like hidden messages, like people that have access to my old art, like you'll be surprised how many hidden messages in there. Cause they'll censor you. Like, you be like, I'm calling y'all open devils, you know? Like, I think y'all the real physical manifestation of devils, right? I don't think it's a fire gonna open up and they're gonna grab you. That's my personal thing. I know Bible. I could preach it with the best of them. But I'm saying, for me, tapping people, I want to keep saying that, just tapping people on the shoulder. Say, excuse me, have you ever heard? And I still do that. Like, people be like, this crazy person, right, is trying to talk to me. I'm like, it's called social communication. Like, what happened to society, right? To Alice's point, one of the things that I found is when I was on death row, and this is a piece of my art, was I made my own flyer for the Ronaldo Hudson Mercy Committee, and it was from the self-portrait that I painted. And I didn't realize the power of painting until I really got into using my art to express the trauma and to express the horror of the stories of people that may never be heard. And people will look at a picture quicker than they come into one of these rooms. And so that it is vitally important that, like, if you have that ability, whatever it is, like, to express yourself, like, you should do it, right? And I was given that opportunity and I love it. I'm ready to do some more. But I think art plays such a powerful message, because one of the most self-promoted people I always talk about was who? Frederick Douglass. Like, it's more portraits of this brother, and he promoted his stuff. And when people think about Frederick Douglass, they think about writing. They don't think about his brilliance and self-promotion, right? They don't think about branding. But Frederick Douglass is, like, if you want to study branding, then go back and study Frederick Douglass, right? And I'm saying that to add that art is a major tool for social justice reform, right? Because one of the things I did inside the building block is I painted murals all over the joint. They used to get mad at me, right? I was like, I'm going to change this command desk into a wooden desk. And I just started painting over the steel. And I painted the stairs, and I painted like panels, and started putting, words like accountability and responsibility, love, trust, change, one step at a time. And I painted scenes, and I painted over the emergency escape door in a prison with this big old, like, I turned the whole wall into like a forest. And the warden came and said, Hudson, where's the emergency escape door? I'm like, that's not my job to be concerned with it. Like, and so he like, well, you got to paint over that. But then this is why it's important to say, when I told you I work with them people, I did, because I was getting really, like, traumatized. Like, I did so many hours of work on this wall. It's wonderful. And he was like, no, dude, it's an emergency escape door. I said, no, it's a beautiful landscape. What are you talking about? Like, that was a real conversation. This is art, right? And it exists as I speak. But then the warden of programs, who was a lady, told you ladies rule the world. They're the smart ones. She looked at him and said, if he just paint a red box around that door and paint in that red emergency, this wonderful painting can stay there. See? Because she cared. Dude was like, oh no, systems, process, security, right? And I'm just saying that's just one little story. I remember another painting, because painting plays a major role. We talk about mental health and self-care. The stairs that I painted was steps of landscape. And when I finished painting it, I went to the shower. When I came back, my peers were sitting in chairs looking at the stairs. And I was like, what is wrong with y'all? They're like, man, this is good meditation stuff. Right. And I said, oh, wow. When I was painted, I wasn't thinking that. I just knew I wanted guys to see something different than those concrete steel stairs. And I'm sharing all that to say, like, it's so much we could do with little stuff. And so just saying hello to someone, excuse me, if you're on the bus. Hey, did you know that the university have a program, right? Hey, did you know? I'm serious, y'all, and then tag people. I ain't playing. I be telling people every time, y'all take y'all cameras out. Take y'all cameras out. Like, what the hell? Y'all can't follow instructions? Like, this is insane. I'm sorry. Take my picture. One of the things the Illinois Department of Correction was really, really good at is stripping people of their identities. And then they took the power of having a portrait or a picture of yourself. And so why people think that that's my ego, which it is some of it, right? It is. But what I've realized is that the power of these moments is recorded. And then if you're talking about how can you get more people to be engaged, you got to show them these beautiful faces up here. You got to show them these brilliant brains up here. You got to show them the power of professors and you ain't a professor yet, man. Right? And the students, right, doing this amazing, amazing work. And we're all on the same level. Check that out. Formerly incarcerated and those that are incarcerated by the oppression of a society that they have no idea that most people are more incarcerated than me because we live in an incarcerated world, right? And so how dare people think that an expert come out of incarceration and you incarcerated yourself? So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, what's your tag?
Oh,
What's
I got
your
a few.
Instagram? How do you want people to tag you?
I'm sorry, Ronaldo Hudson 337. That's it. I think I got a bunch of them. I open so many, I don't even know how many. And I send double pictures to people. They be like, we know you're not a professional Instagrammer because you send people the same picture 8 times.
And tag CSRP at CSRPC also if you put a picture of Ronaldo up. But
yeah,
we got to wrap it up. But I want to thank our panelists.
I just want to tell people you can check out Ronaldo's artwork as part of his residency with us. He worked with a student who created an online gallery of his work. So that's heartworks.com. You can also meet some of the members of the think tank at humansofliferoad.com. Another student created that website. And for any undergraduate students in here, if you're interested in taking that mixed enrollment course, spring quarter, talk to Taji. He's organizing our application.
Thank you to our panel. Thank you to our audience. So we have a 15-minute break now, and our next part of the program is a performance, and it's going to be in this building. It's on the first floor. You came in, the door you came in, it's down that hallway, the main hallway to the opposite side of the building is Theater East. It's on the first floor. Folks will be out in the hallway to direct you, hopefully. But yeah, thank you all. And we look forward to seeing you at the performance. Yeah. Thank you. British accent. What? Let's take a selfie. We gotta take a picture. Oh, we gotta take a picture.